Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place in the cosmos where your thoughts can unwind and knowledge becomes a soft lullaby for the night. Tonight's journey will take us into a question as old as wonder itself, yet as fresh as the next breath you take. What if everything connects? What if the universe isn't a scattered collection of distant stars and lonely atoms, but a single living tapestry, woven from threads that stretch from the smallest quantum flicker to the depths of your own consciousness? Before we drift deeper into this mystery, if you feel comfortable doing so, I'd love to ask you to like this video and subscribe, only if these gentle explorations bring you a sense of peace. And when you're ready, feel free to leave a comment sharing where in the world you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the night. It's always strangely comforting to imagine hundreds of quiet rooms across the planet, each with a small glowing screen, gathering us like stars in the same sky. Now, if you haven't already, feel free to dim the lights, soften your breathing, or perhaps turn on a small fan for a steady background hum. Let the world slow down around you. Tonight, we aren't rushing toward answers. We're simply wandering, following the subtle threads that science and experience leave for us like footprints on soft ground. And if your mind begins to drift a little, that's perfectly all right. We'll still be here together, gently unfolding this story of how the universe might be much more connected than it appears. Imagine, just for a moment, the way your day felt today. The quiet spaces, the small worries, the familiar routines. It's easy to feel as though you move through life entirely within your own little bubble, touching others only briefly. But beneath the surface of all those moments lies something much deeper, something ancient and patient, a structure of connection that has always been there, quietly supporting everything you see and everything you are. Tonight we begin by exploring that surface, the illusion of separateness, before slowly peeling it back to reveal the hidden architecture underneath. So, settle in, let your shoulders drop, and allow the quiet question to take shape within you. What if the distance between things is not as real as it seems? This is where our journey begins. There is a quiet moment at the end of most days when the world seems to shrink down to the size of your own thoughts. Maybe it happens as you lie in bed, or when you stare out a window at a passing crowd. In those moments, it almost feels as though you're a small island floating alone, surrounded by a sea of strangers, each carrying their own stories that you will never fully know. This feeling of separateness, of being a single point drifting in a wide world, is something nearly everyone experiences. It is so familiar that we rarely question it. We wake up inside our own minds, speak from our own perspectives, and listen through our own histories. Everything we perceive arrives through the narrow doorway of our senses, and so it is easy to believe that each of us is a tiny universe sealed off from the rest. This impression is reinforced everywhere we look. We live in homes with walls that carve space into private chambers. We carry identification cards that assign us to nations and categories, defining who we are and who we are not. We move through systems that encourage individual achievement and personal boundaries. Even in the digital realm, where the world feels more connected than ever, our feeds are shaped by algorithms that show us only the pieces of reality that mirror what we already believe. In subtle ways, day after day, the world whispers the same message. You are separate. You stand alone. But if you stay with this feeling a little longer, something curious begins to happen. The certainty of separateness softens around the edges, the same way a shadow blurs as the sun begins to set. What feels like an absolute truth starts to seem more like a habit, a way of thinking we inherited rather than something fundamental about our existence. Consider for a moment how you learned the boundaries of the world as a child. You were taught where your body ended and the rest of the world began. You were taught to say, "This is mine and that is yours." You were taught to understand the world in categories and divisions, each with its own label. But beneath all that learning, there was once a time when you simply experienced everything as sensation, warmth, sound, colour, the rhythm of another heartbeat against your ear. Connection was there before separation was learned. Even now, traces of that early sense of unity linger quietly in your life. Think of how deeply a piece of music can resonate, as though it speaks a language older than words, or how a stranger's laughter can make you smile before you even realise it, or how a conversation with someone you care about can feel like two minds gently overlapping. These moments are small, but they hint at something larger, a subtle network of influence and resonance that moves between us, even when we are unaware of it. Separation, it turns out, might be more of a practical convenience than an ultimate truth. It allows us to navigate the world, to make choices, to define a self that can act. But when we look more closely, whether through introspection, psychology, or science, the boundaries begin to blur. Our memories are shaped by the people we've known. Our identities evolve through relationships. Our moods shift with the emotional weather around us. In countless tiny ways, we are continuously shaped by the world we think we stand apart from. There is something gentle and humbling about recognizing this. It's like realizing that the island you thought you lived on is actually connected to countless others beneath the surface, forming a single continent hidden under the waves. And as this understanding begins to settle in your mind, it invites a question that feels both thrilling and strangely peaceful. If separateness is not the whole story, then what lies beyond it? What deep pattern might we find if we begin to look beyond the surface of individuality? You can almost sense the answer waiting, like a soft glow behind the curtain of ordinary perception. To follow it, we'll need to shift our gaze from the familiar world of solid objects and personal space into a realm where the rules are different, where connection is not an echo, but the very foundation. As we drift further into this journey, we will gently leave behind the feeling of standing alone and begin to explore the hidden threads that bind everything together, from the smallest flickers of matter to the vastness of the cosmos. There is a quiet, almost instinctive comfort in believing that the world is made of separate pieces. It gives us something solid to hold on to, a name, a place, a story we can point to and say, "This is me." And for most of our lives, this understanding works well enough. It helps us organise our days, navigate relationships, and make sense of a world that is often overwhelming in its complexity. But when you look closely, not with the hurried glance of daily life, but with the slow, curious gaze you might use when observing a sleeping cat or the shifting colours of a sunset, something about this picture begins to feel incomplete. It is as though the world we see is only the surface of something deeper, a faint reflection on still water, hinting at a richer landscape below. Science, especially in its early centuries, leaned heavily into this sense of separateness. It dissected, categorized, labeled, and measured. It took the universe apart like a watchmaker opening a clock, convinced that if it could understand every little gear, it would understand the whole. This approach, reductionism, gave us incredible gifts. It revealed the structure of the atom, the function of the cell, the laws of motion, the chemistry of stars. But in its focus on the parts, it sometimes lost sight of the patterns. It saw the dots but not the lines connecting them. It treated the world like a puzzle broken into 1,000 pieces, forgetting that the final image is more than the sum of its fragments. If you've ever zoomed in too close on a photograph, you might know this feeling. At a certain level of magnification, all you see are pixels, tiny squares of colour, each slightly different from the next. But when you step back, when you let your eyes rest at the right distance, those independent pixels gather themselves into something meaningful, a face, a landscape, a memory. That gentle shift from pieces to picture is the same shift that modern science has been quietly undergoing. After centuries of examining the universe one pixel at a time, it has begun to step back and notice the image those pixels create. You can see this shift in fields across the scientific world. In ecology, researchers discovered that studying a single species in isolation only tells half the story. The real magic lies in the relationships, the pollinators, the soil microbes, the flow of nutrients through a forest. In neuroscience, scientists realize that no single neuron, no matter how active, can explain consciousness. It emerges from networks, rhythms, and harmonies spread across the entire brain. Even in physics, where the idea of solid building blocks seemed most secure, deeper investigation revealed that particles are less like tiny marbles and more like events, fleeting excitations woven into a continuous, invisible field. These insights, scattered across different disciplines, have begun to converge into a gentle but radical idea. The universe may not be a machine built from separate parts, but a tapestry woven from relationships. The threads are subtle, often hidden, but they are everywhere. They show up in the way birds in a flock turn together, as though sharing a single mind. They show up in how children intuitively mirror the emotions of those around them. They show up in the way one change in a distant ecosystem can ripple across continents. They even show up in the way your mood can shift simply by being near someone who is anxious or joyful, as if an invisible current passes between you. Once you start seeing these patterns, it becomes difficult to unsee them. The world no longer looks like a collection of isolated entities. It begins to feel more like a vast and intricate network, with each thread subtly tugging on the others. You too become part of that network, not as an outsider peering in, but as a node within it, influencing and being influenced, shaping and being shaped. It's a perspective that doesn't erase individuality, but rather places it within a larger living context. This shift from parts to patterns invites us to rethink many assumptions. For instance, when we say something is mine, we usually picture a neat boundary separating what belongs to us from what does not. But consider how many influences flow quietly into your life, shaping who you are, the teachers who encouraged you, the artists who stirred your imagination, the communities that gave you language and meaning. Even your body is not entirely your own. It carries DNA from ancestors you'll never meet and hosts trillions of microscopic organisms that help you digest food, regulate mood, and defend against illness. In a very real sense, you are a mosaic of countless contributions, a living archive of interactions stretching far beyond your personal story. There is a gentle beauty in realizing this. It softens the hard edges of identity, replacing the idea of a rigid separation with something more fluid and interconnected. It suggests that the self is not a fortress but a crossroads, where countless histories, influences, and energies meet. And as this image takes shape, it opens the door to an even deeper insight. The multiplicity we see in the world may itself be a surface effect, a convenient layer over a more unified reality waiting to be uncovered. To explore that deeper layer, we'll need to shift again, this time not just stepping back from the details of daily life, but stepping inward into the microscopic foundations of reality. It is here, in the realm of the very small, that the illusion of separateness begins to unravel most dramatically. For at the smallest scales, the universe behaves in ways that defy intuition. as though whispering that the boundaries we see are not as solid as they seem. As we drift into that quantum landscape, we will find that connection isn't an exception but a rule, and that the deeper we look, the more the universe resembles a single, continuous dance, rather than a collection of isolated performers. There is a moment when you first begin to explore the world of the very small, where ordinary intuition quietly steps aside. The familiar rules melt away, and reality begins to act like a dream that hasn't fully decided on its plot. This is the realm of the quantum, a place where particles appear to blur into clouds, where things can be in more than one state at once, and where events unfold with a delicacy that feels almost alive. If the world we see every day is like a sturdy tree with roots and branches, the quantum world is like the mist that surrounds it, subtle, shifting, impossible to grasp in your hands, and yet this mist underlies everything. Every atom in your body, every breath you take, every star in the sky owes its existence to this ghostly foundation. Among all the peculiar behaviours found in the quantum realm, one stands out for its quiet insistence that our ordinary idea of separateness simply doesn't apply: entanglement. Even the word itself feels like a gentle contradiction. Something tangled yet not physically touching, something linked yet without any visible thread. To imagine what entanglement means, you might picture two dancers who learned a choreography so perfectly that even when placed across a vast stage from one another, they still move in flawless harmony. They do not signal, they do not glance at each other, and yet each step taken by one seems mysteriously matched by the other, as though they share a rhythm deeper than distance. In the quantum world, this harmony is not just beautiful, it is startlingly real. When two particles become entangled, something subtle and profound happens. Their identities, which we like to imagine as tidy and individual, begin to overlap. They stop behaving as separate objects and start acting like parts of a single system, even when they drift far apart. A change made to one is not communicated to the other. That would be too slow, too mechanical. Instead, the change seems to reveal something that was already shared, already written into the relationship between them. If that sounds abstract, you're not alone. Even the scientists who first encountered entanglement struggled with it. Albert Einstein famously called it spooky, though he meant the word more critically than fondly. He believed the universe should behave like a sensible machine, where influences move no faster than light and nothing affects anything else without some sort of physical touch. But decades later, a series of clever experiments gently nudged intuition aside and show that entanglement is not an oddity or a glitch. It is a fundamental feature of reality. To explain those experiments softly, imagine a pair of coins that behave in a peculiar way. Each coin can land on heads or tails, but when you flip them, you never know which one you'll see until you actually look. The surprising part is this: if the coins are entangled, flipping one instantly tells you the result of the other, even if it is far away. It's not that the result of the second coin changed, it's that the outcome was somehow shared between them from the beginning, like two pages of a story that were printed together. No message travels, no signal crosses the distance. The connection isn't carried, it simply is. Scientists tested this again and again, placing entangled particles farther and farther apart, first across a room, then across a building, then across entire cities. At one point, entangled particles were sent to separate islands, with hundreds of kilometers of ocean between them. The result was always the same. The moment one particle was measured, the other responded as though distance were irrelevant. The universe, it seemed, cared more about the relationship between them than the space separating them. This is why some physicists describe entanglement not as a communication, but as a kind of shared state, a single note played on two instruments at once. And that note, delicate and invisible, becomes louder as you begin to understand its implications. Because if two particles can be connected this way, then the same might be true for larger systems, and perhaps, in a gentle and speculative way, for everything. After all, everything in the universe was once gathered in a single, unimaginably dense point before expanding into the cosmos we see today. If separateness is something that emerges later, like branches growing from a trunk, then entanglement is a reminder that the trunk still exists, hidden underneath, carrying connections we rarely notice. It's tempting to imagine entanglement as a magical bridge linking distant objects, but it might be more accurate to think of it as a subtle clue, a whisper from the quantum world that says, boundaries may not be as real as they look. In a sense, entanglement takes the idea of separation and gently loosens its threads. It hints that the universe may not be a collection of independently existing pieces, but a single unfolding process in which every part retains some memory of its origin. You can see this shift reflected even in the language scientists use. They no longer talk about particles as little objects bouncing around like tiny billiard balls. They describe them as excitations, brief ripples in vast underlying fields that stretch across all of space. In that view, entanglement isn't a rare phenomenon. It is a natural consequence of the fact that everything emerges from the same continuous fabric. The ripples may look separate, but the water that carries them is one. There is something strangely comforting in this perspective. It suggests that beneath all the noise and complexity of the world, there is a quiet coherence, a hidden harmony. And even though entanglement is subtle and nearly impossible to sense in daily life, the idea behind it can change the way you see everything. It reminds you that connection is not an accident or an exception. It is woven into the very structure of existence. Every part of the universe, from the tiniest spark of matter to the grand sweep of galaxies, seems to carry within it a faint echo of a deeper unity. As you let this idea settle, you might notice a gentle feeling of spaciousness, as though the walls of separateness are beginning to soften. To follow this thread further, we'll drift deeper into the quantum landscape, exploring not just how particles connect, but how the very space around them might arise from connections that exist beneath what we can see. If you were to zoom in on the world far beyond anything the eye can see, farther than any microscope could ever reach, you would find that the familiar idea of particles begins to dissolve. The tiny dots we learn about in school, the electrons, protons, and countless others, are useful characters, but they are not the whole story. As you continue to zoom in, the solid points blur into something softer, more fluid, more like a shimmer than a shape. And if you zoom in even further, all the way into the foundation beneath those shimmers, you arrive at one of the most quietly astonishing ideas in modern science. The universe is not made of things, but of fields. A field, in the quantum sense, is not a sheet or a surface or a region you can map with lines. It is more like an invisible presence that fills all space, everywhere and at all times. Instead of picturing particles as individual marbles moving through emptiness, physicists describe them as gentle ripples spreading across these vast, ever-present fields. Imagine a perfectly calm lake stretching infinitely in every direction. Now imagine dropping a tiny pebble onto its surface. The ripple that spreads outward is what we call a particle. It isn't a separate object floating above the water. It is the water itself, momentarily excited into motion. This idea, known as quantum field theory, changes the way we imagine the universe in a profound but surprisingly gentle way. Instead of countless isolated objects colliding and interacting, we begin to picture a single continuous ocean with many different kinds of ripples. An electron is not a tiny bead rushing around. It is a specific kind of vibration in the electron field. A photon, the particle of light, is a ripple in the light field. Every particle we know emerges from its corresponding field, like notes played on an instrument that never stops resonating. In this view, the emptiness between objects is not empty at all. It is alive with fields layered like invisible currents. Everywhere you go, in the space between your hands, in the room around you, even in the quiet air above your head, these fields are present, humming softly in a state of restless stillness. Even what we call empty space is full of potential, a kind of cosmic waiting room where ripples can appear and disappear in a flicker, far too fast for the human eye to catch. When you begin to see the universe this way, something subtle shifts. The idea of separate things becomes much less solid. Instead of objects that exist independently, we find excitations of the same underlying fabric. It is almost like realizing that every character in a play is performed by the same actor in different costumes. On the surface, they seem separate, but beneath the roles, a single presence connects them all. Quantum fields offer a scientific echo of this idea, not philosophical but physical, observable, measured with astonishing precision. One of the most beautiful consequences of this framework is how naturally entanglement fits into it. In a world made of separate particles, entanglement feels strange. How can two distinct objects remain connected without any physical link? But in a universe made of continuous fields, entanglement is no more surprising than two ripples arising from the same drop entering the same lake. Their connection is not maintained across distance. It originates from the fact that they were never truly separate in the first place. To make this easier to picture, imagine again that vast, calm lake. Now picture placing two fingertips gently against its surface some distance apart. If you move one finger just slightly, a wave spreads outward. When that wave reaches the other fingertip, it makes it rise in response. The fingertips themselves are separate, but the water beneath them is not. The motion of one affects the other, because both are part of the same continuous whole. In much the same way, the ripples we call particles are shaped, influenced, and connected by the fields underneath them. The surface of reality is textured with these connections that run deeper than distance. Modern experiments give hints of this unity in delicate but convincing ways. When we probe empty space with powerful machines, we find that the vacuum is never silent. Particles flicker into existence and vanish. Energy shifts rhythmically. Even when we strip away all matter and light, the fields remain like a faint hum, too quiet for ordinary senses but unmistakably real. It is as though the universe carries a kind of quiet heartbeat, a background pulse from which everything else emerges. For something as strange as quantum field theory, these ideas can feel surprisingly soothing. They paint a picture of the universe not as a scattering of isolated bits, but as an unbroken expanse, a seamless body whose movements we perceive as matter and whose vibrations we perceive as energy. When you think of it that way, the question of connection stops being mysterious. Connection is simply the way the universe is. Separation becomes the illusion, the surface-level experience that arises when we focus only on the ripples and not on the water. And if everything is woven into these fields, everything you touch, everything you see, everything you dream, then the boundary between you and the world grows softer too. The atoms in your body are ripples in the same fields that ripple through stars. The warmth in your chest is carried by vibrations of the same field that fills every corner of space. Even your thoughts, electrical and delicate, move through patterns shaped by the same cosmic fabric. You're not merely in the universe, you're of it, arising from the same invisible sea. As this realization settles in, it makes entanglement feel less like a magic trick and more like a reminder, a gentle nudge that what we call separate things are not truly separate, but brief patterns shaped by the same underlying presence. And as we drift deeper into these ideas, a new question begins to form. If matter itself is a series of ripples on a continuous sea, then what about the space that carries those ripples? Could the very shape of space, its curves, its distance, its flow of time, also emerge from deeper connections? To explore that possibility, we'll continue our journey further into this subtle landscape, letting the next layer reveal itself with the same quiet wonder that has guided us so far. If the idea of particles transforming into ripples already softens the way we imagine reality, then the next step invites an even gentler shift, one that reaches into the shape of the universe itself. Most of us grow up thinking of space as a kind of quiet container, a backdrop where stars shine, planets drift, and thoughts travel from one corner of the mind to another. Time, meanwhile, feels like an arrow moving steadily forward, carrying us from moment to moment. Together, space and time seem like the stage on which everything happens. But modern physics whispers something far more delicate. Perhaps the stage itself is woven from the same threads of connection that bind the actors together. To ease into this idea, imagine holding a piece of cloth. When you pull on one corner, the weave stretches. When you press down on the centre, it curves inward. The cloth doesn't just sit there passively, it responds to every touch, because it is made of interlocking threads, each one influencing the other. Space and time, when viewed closely enough, behave in much the same way. They are not rigid or fixed. They bend around mass and energy, they ripple with waves, and they stretch as the universe expands. In this sense, space-time is less like a static box and more like a living fabric, constantly shifting in response to what passes through it. But the quiet revelation that has emerged from recent research is even more intriguing. Some physicists now suspect that space-time itself may not be fundamental. Instead, it might emerge from patterns of connection at an even deeper level. Patterns woven by information, relationships, and what we might think of as the universe's underlying memory. To picture this softly, imagine a tapestry hanging on a wall. From a distance, the images appear solid: mountains, rivers, faces, animals. But up close, you see that every shape is formed from threads crossing in precise ways. The story on the surface depends entirely on how those threads connect beneath it. In the same way, a growing body of scientific thought suggests that the geometry of the universe, its distances, its curves, its passage of time, might arise from hidden networks of connections, tiny relationships that hold reality together the way threads hold a tapestry. It's an idea inspired by many converging insights. For instance, when researchers study the strange behavior of black holes, they find that the amount of information they can hold depends on the surface of the hole, not its volume. That simple observation hints that space may not behave as a normal three-dimensional stage. Instead, its structure may be encoded on a kind of underlying surface, the way a flat screen can project a three-dimensional scene. Other researchers, approaching from a different direction, found something equally surprising. When they examined how particles become entangled, they noticed that the structure of entanglement, who is connected to whom and how strongly, seems to shape the space between them. If the connections change, the space changes. Where the ties are dense, space appears smooth and close-knit. Where the ties thin out, space stretches. In this sense, entanglement seems to act like the thread tension in a woven cloth. Tighten one area, and the pattern shifts. Loosen another, and the shape distorts. To make this idea easier to hold, You might imagine a large net being woven in midair. Each knot where the threads meet represents a relationship between two tiny bits of information. If many connections gather in one region, the net thickens and pulls tighter, creating a curvature that resembles gravity. If the connections are sparse, the net relaxes and spreads out. What we perceive as the shape of space, its distances, its bends, its flowing time, could be the visible expression of how these underlying threads are arranged. This might sound abstract, but it carries a gentle beauty that aligns with many things we've already seen. Earlier, we imagined particles as ripples on a vast field. Now, we're invited to imagine those fields themselves resting on deeper relationships. It is a slow descent through layers of reality, each one feeling less like a collection of objects and more like an interplay of connections. The deeper we go, the more the universe resembles not a machine but a weaving, dynamic, unified, and constantly responding to itself. Perhaps the most poetic version of this idea suggests that what we call a wormhole, a tunnel connecting distant points in space, might simply be a physical metaphor for entanglement. Instead of picturing a tunnel carved through space, imagine two entangled regions of information being so deeply linked that they bypass ordinary distance altogether. In that perspective, a wormhole is less like a passage and more like a reminder that the universe folds itself in ways our senses cannot detect. Again, no symbols or equations are needed here. Just imagine a sheet of paper folded so that two distant points touch. The points have not moved, the fabric beneath them simply rearranged. Whether or not these deeper models of reality turn out to be correct, they share a gentle lesson. The structure of the universe might be far more relational than we ever imagined. Space may not be an empty void. Time may not be a strict river. Both may be flexible patterns arising from something more intimate, the way the universe connects with itself. Much like consciousness emerging from the interplay of countless neurons, space-time might emerge from the interplay of countless invisible threads. This perspective can change the way we feel about our place in the universe. Instead of floating inside a vast empty container, we become participants in a living fabric that is constantly unfolding. The space between you and a distant star is not a barren gulf, but part of the same continuous cloth, shaped by countless connections. Even your own body with its warmth and beating heart is part of that fabric, woven from the same underlying fields and relationships. The same threads that shape the curves of galaxies shape the moment passing through your mind right now. As this realization begins to settle, the world softens once again. Separation appears thinner. Distance feels less absolute. And a new question rises quietly from the depths. If the universe is made of these hidden connections, then how does this pattern show itself in the world we can touch, in forests, oceans, creatures, weather, and all the living systems that surround us? To answer that, we will gently rise from the quantum realm and step into the bright breathing networks of nature, where connection takes on a form we can see and feel with our own senses. When we lift our gaze from the subtle quantum threads and return to the world, we can touch with our hands and see with our eyes. Everything feels sturdier again. Trees stand firm. Rivers carve their paths. Animals wander through forests with quiet determination. It is easy to imagine that each of these things, trees, rivers, birds, even you, exists as its own independent unit, living out its story within the boundaries of its own form. But if you sit with nature long enough, if you slow your breathing and simply watch, another pattern begins to emerge, soft and patient, like a whisper beneath the wind. You begin to see that life is not made of isolated beings at all. It is made of relationships, a vast, shimmering web where every movement sends ripples through the whole. Imagine standing in a forest at dawn. At first, your eyes pick out individual shapes. A tree trunk here, a fern there, a thin beam of light slipping between leaves. But as your attention widens, something changes. The forest stops feeling like a collection of separate objects and instead becomes a single living presence. The air seems to breathe. The branches sway as though responding to one another. Even the silence feels shared. This shift is not just poetic, it is deeply real. Science, in its slow and careful way, has begun to recognize that ecosystems behave less like gatherings of separate species and more like interconnected communities, almost like a single organism with many limbs. Consider the trees themselves. For centuries, people thought of them as lone individuals competing for sunlight and soil. But hidden beneath the forest floor lies a vast network of fungal threads, so delicate they resemble hair-thin strands of dew. These threads connect root to root, linking trees of every age and species. Through this network, nutrients flow from one tree to another, almost like blood circulating in a body. A tree that is shaded and struggling can receive sugars from a tree bathed in sunlight. A seedling too young to support itself can be fed by its elders. When a tree is attacked by pests, it can send warning signals through the network, prompting its neighbours to strengthen their defences. This system is sometimes called the Wood Wide Web, but you could just as easily think of it as the forest's nervous system. A communication network built not from neurons, but from soil, fungi and roots intertwined. The forest, it turns out, is not a collection of trees. It is a unity appearing as many. Animals show this hidden unity too. Watch a school of fish gliding through water. They move with such synchronized grace that it becomes difficult to see them as individuals. Each fish seems to sense the shifting flow around it and adjust instantly, responding to ripples of information that spread through the group. On land, flocks of birds swirl across the sky in patterns so fluid that they look like a single organism dancing in mid-air. No leader commands them, no signals are shouted. Instead, each bird follows simple relational cues from its neighbours, a whisper of movement, a shift of air, and out of those tiny interactions emerges a harmony no single bird could create alone. Even at the microscopic level, cooperation and connection are everywhere. The soil under your feet is alive with bacteria forming intricate metabolic partnerships. Some break down minerals, others release nutrients, others digest what the first cannot. Together, they create the conditions for plants to thrive. In coral reefs, tiny algae live inside the cells of corals, feeding them and receiving shelter in return. These relationships are so deeply intertwined that when the algae leave, often due to warming waters, the coral itself can die, like a limb losing circulation. And then there is the strange truth that your body is not entirely your own. It is a world in miniature, home to trillions of microorganisms, bacteria, fungi and others that outnumber your human cells. They help you digest food, govern parts of your immune system, and even influence your mood. The warmth in your belly after a meal, the steadiness in your energy, the clarity or fogginess of your thoughts. All these sensations are shaped by these tiny residents living in delicate partnership with you. You're not just one being, you're a community, a living symphony of microscopic lives that came together to form what you call you. Once you begin to grasp this, the idea of individuality starts to soften. Life is not built from isolated units trying to survive on their own. It is built from relationships, threads of exchange, assistance, and sensitivity that bind each creature to its surroundings. A forest does not live because each tree is strong. It lives because everything within it, from insects to soil to water to air, participates in a shared rhythm. This pattern extends beyond forests and oceans. Weather systems shift in response to tiny changes in temperature across distant regions. A drought in one part of the world affects food availability in another. The migration of a single species can transform entire landscapes. Even the carbon we breathe out becomes food for plants, which in turn release the oxygen we inhale. Every breath you take is part of a cycle as old as the planet, a quiet exchange between you and the green world around you. And in all of this, you can sense the same message that quantum physics hinted at. Things that appear separate on the surface are deeply connected beneath it. The threads of nature are different from the threads of quantum fields. One is made of living matter, the other of subtle vibration. But both whisper the same truth. The world is woven, not assembled. The connections matter as much as, or even more than, the parts themselves. As this understanding settles, you may begin to feel the world around you differently, less like scenery and more like something that includes you, holds you, and responds to you. Nature ceases to be out there and becomes something you participate in simply by being alive. And once that door opens, another question rises gently to meet you. If life on Earth is a web rather than a collection of species, then what patterns emerge when we look at the deeper cycles that bind this planet together? To follow that thread, we will drift from living networks to the vast rhythms of Earth itself, the cycles that weave the planet into a single, breathing whole. When you shift your attention from the living organisms of Earth to the movements that sustain them, a new kind of unity begins to reveal itself. It is quieter than the rustle of forest leaves or the chorus of birds at dawn, but it is everywhere. In the air you breathe, the water that falls from the sky, the soil that receives it, and the warmth that spreads through the seasons like a slow pulse. These are Earth's cycles, the planetary rhythms that move through every ecosystem, connecting beings that will never meet and weaving together lives that seem at first glance entirely separate. You can feel these cycles most easily in the breath. A simple inhale, a slow exhale. Actions so familiar that they rarely call attention to themselves. But each breath carries a story far larger than any single moment. When you inhale, you draw in oxygen that may have been released by a rainforest thousands of kilometers away, or by a drifting patch of algae near the surface of the sea. The air in your lungs is not yours alone. It is part of a planetary exchange that has been ongoing for billions of years. And when you release that breath, the carbon dioxide you exhale becomes nourishment for plants, trees, and microorganisms. You become part of their cycle, and they become part of yours, in a quiet reciprocity that continues whether you notice it or not. This exchange is part of the carbon cycle, one of Earth's oldest and most profound patterns. Instead of imagining it as a diagram with arrows and labels, you might picture it as a kind of planetary heartbeat, carbon flowing from air to life, from life to soil, from soil to stone, and from stone back to air again through volcanic breaths. Every creature participates, from microscopic plankton drifting in sunlit waters to ancient forests standing tall against mountain winds. Even the stones beneath your feet hold carbon locked away from ages long past, waiting for the slow tick of geological time to release it once more. It is a rhythm so steady and so vast that entire civilizations rise and fall while it continues, unhurried, unconcerned, and essential. The water cycle is just as elegant. Every droplet you've ever touched, in rain, in rivers, in the steam rising from a hot cup, has lived countless lives. A single molecule of water might have passed through a cloud over the Pacific Ocean, fallen onto a desert stone, frozen inside a glacier, melted into a stream, carried a fish downstream, evaporated under the sun, and finally become part of the rain tapping gently against your window. The journey is endless and cyclical, never repeated exactly but always familiar. Water binds the planet by moving not in straight lines but in loops. Loops that tie together oceans, winds, mountains, forests, farms, cities and people. Even the soil beneath your feet participates in its own slow cycle, shaped by the movement of minerals and the quiet labour of countless organisms. When leaves fall to the forest floor, they begin a long transformation guided by fungi, insects and bacteria. The nutrients released from this process feed roots, which nourish trees, which in turn drop more leaves. What seems like decay is actually continuation, a slow choreography of turning death into life and life into new possibilities. And when that soil washes into streams, it carries nutrients to distant places, enriching ecosystems you may never see yet are indirectly connected to through food, air, and climate. The nitrogen cycle, although less poetic at first glance, holds life together with equal grace. Every organism on Earth needs nitrogen to build its tissues, yet the form of nitrogen most abundant in the air cannot be used directly by plants or animals. Instead, tiny microbes in the soil perform a quiet miracle, converting nitrogen into usable forms, a process that nourishes plants, feeds animals, and eventually sustains us. These transformations are not chemical equations on a chalkboard. They are everyday acts of generosity from some of the smallest beings on the planet. Without them, forests would wither, oceans would grow barren, and the world would fall silent. When you step back and look at these cycles together, they begin to resemble the interconnected systems of a single vast organism. Water flows like blood, carrying nutrients and maintaining balance. Carbon moves like breath, inhaled and exhaled by the entire planet. Minerals circulate like essential nutrients in a body, supplying what is needed and carrying away what is spent. Even temperature, rising and falling in waves through day and night, through season after season, feels like the gentle pulse of a living world adjusting itself, warming here, cooling there, maintaining conditions in which life can flourish. These cycles do not operate in isolation. They intertwine. A shift in one becomes a shift in another, like threads that pull on each other in a tightly woven cloth. When oceans warm, evaporation changes, altering weather patterns. When forests shrink, the carbon cycle wavers, influencing climate. When soil is depleted, water cannot be held, leading to droughts or floods. Each cycle leans on the others for support, creating a delicate equilibrium that keeps the planet hospitable. It is a system of balance, not static, but dynamic, always adjusting, always responding. But perhaps the most profound realization is that you are not outside these cycles. You're woven into them. The minerals in your bones were once part of ancient stones broken down by rain and root. The oxygen in your blood was exhaled by some distant plant. The water in your cells has travelled through clouds, oceans, glaciers and rivers. You're a brief chapter in the long biography of Earth's matter, a momentary arrangement of molecules that were here long before you and will remain long after. This does not diminish individuality. Instead, it deepens your sense of belonging. You are part of Earth's story, carried forward by cycles older than memory. Seeing the planet this way, as a living network of cycles, softens the illusion of separation even further. You begin to sense that the act of breathing is not solitary. It is a dialogue. Eating is not consumption. It is participation. Walking across the ground is not movement through space. It is a return to a home that has always held you gently, whether you noticed it or not. As this understanding settles, it prepares you for the next layer of connection, one that moves beyond Earth's surface and stretches into the smallest corners within you. Because if Earth is held together by cycles, then each creature living upon it is held together by networks even more intricate and intimate. And within your own body lies one of the most astonishing webs of all, a hidden world of microscopic life that shapes your health, your emotions, and even your sense of self. That is where our journey drifts next, into the quiet, unseen world inside you, where trillions of tiny lives move in harmony, forming a community far more connected than the word individual could ever capture. If the great cycles of Earth reveal how deeply all life on the planet is intertwined, then the next step draws that understanding inward, inviting you to look within your own body and discover a kind of interconnectedness that feels almost miraculous. It is a world that rarely shows itself, yet it shapes everything you experience, from your energy to your emotions, from your immune system to the quiet sense of well-being that settles over you on peaceful days. This world is microscopic, densely populated, and astonishingly collaborative. It is the microbial community living inside you, a bustling ecosystem so vast and complex that calling it yours feels almost like calling the ocean your own because you live near its shore. You might imagine yourself as a single organism, one consistent self moving through life, but the truth is softer and more surprising. You're a symphony performed by trillions of tiny musicians. These microbes, bacteria, viruses, fungi, and countless others inhabit your skin, your digestive tract, your lungs, and even the warm folds of your mouth. They arrive at birth, grow with you, shift with your diet, and respond to your emotions. They eat what you eat, breathe what you breathe, and quietly keep your internal world running in harmony. To picture this without getting lost in technical language, imagine a small, vibrant city inside your body. Each neighbourhood has its own residents, each resident has a job, and all the jobs together maintain balance. Some residents help digest food, breaking down fibres you cannot break down on your own. Others produce vitamins that your body relies on, almost like tiny factories working day and night. Some regulate inflammation, calming your immune system when it's too loud and rousing it when danger approaches. Still others help shape neurotransmitters, the soft chemical messages that influence mood, memory, and thought. It may sound extraordinary, but these microscopic citizens weigh more altogether than your brain. Their collective genetic material outnumbers yours many times over. In a very real sense, your body is not inhabited by them. It is shaped by them. You're not a single organism. You're an ecosystem. Nowhere is this more evident than in the gut, where trillions of microbes work together in a harmony almost too smooth to notice. Imagine a bustling market at dawn, vendors arranging foods, exchanging goods, and preparing for the day. In your gut, this market never sleeps. As food arrives, different species step in to break it down, some focusing on fibres, others on proteins or fats. As they digest, they release tiny compounds that nourish the cells lining your gut, help regulate your appetite, or even travel to your brain to influence how calm or anxious you feel. This is sometimes called the gut-brain connection, but you don't need to memorize the term. You only need to imagine a quiet conversation happening between your stomach and your mind, carried by invisible messengers shaped by microscopic life. The effects of this connection are gentle but profound. A diverse gut community is often associated with more stable moods, clearer thinking, and deeper resilience during stressful times. When the microbial city inside you is thriving, it can feel as though there is more steadiness in your inner world, more softness at the edges of your thoughts. Conversely, when this community becomes imbalanced, through stress, illness, or poor sleep, it can feel as though the ground beneath you shifts just slightly, affecting your energy or your emotional clarity. These changes happen quietly, without fanfare, and yet they guide the rhythm of your days. Some of the most beautiful examples of cooperation happen at the very places you might not expect. On your skin, microbes form protective communities that defend you from harmful invaders. In your lungs, they help maintain the delicate balance needed for smooth breathing. In the folds of your mouth, different species form miniature ecosystems that keep the environment stable. Everywhere these tiny residents live, they are not simply passengers. They are partners, part of a living web that extends through and around you. Once you begin to see the body this way, individuality softens again. You realize that you is not a single solid entity, but a constantly shifting collaboration. Every day you exchange microbes with the world around you, through food, through touch, through the air itself. A walk in a forest changes the microbial patterns in your lungs. A deep breath on the ocean shore introduces new species to your skin. Even the people you spend time with subtly influence your internal ecosystem, as though each interaction leaves a quiet, biological imprint. This interconnectedness within the body mirrors the interconnectedness we see in forests, oceans, and even the quantum world. The patterns repeat in different scales, networks of cooperation, systems of balance, relationships that sustain life. Just as roots communicate beneath the soil and birds coordinate in the sky, microbes align their activities inside you, creating a living network that is both delicate and incredibly resilient. Perhaps the most humbling part of this realization is how ancient these relationships are. Microbes have existed for billions of years, long before plants, animals, or humans appeared. They shaped the early atmosphere, making it breathable. They sculpted the soil that allowed forests to grow. And when life became complex enough to form creatures like us, microbes joined those bodies as partners rather than passengers. We didn't conquer them, we inherited them, and we continue to rely on them with every breath, every meal, every heartbeat. This perspective can shift the way you feel about yourself in a gentle, profound way. It suggests that your body is not a fortress to defend, but a community to support, a tiny world carrying echoes of the planet's larger ecosystems. It reminds you that you are never really alone, even in the quietest moments. Within you, millions of tiny allies are working, cooperating, and balancing in ways that keep you alive. And just as these microscopic residents sustain your internal world, so too does the brain, the seat of thought and perception, rely on its own astonishing network of connection. The next part of our journey leads us there, into the inner universe of the mind, where trillions of neurons form patterns as intricate as any forest, and where the illusion of separateness dissolves once again in a deeper understanding of connection. If you close your eyes for a moment and simply listen to the gentle hum of your own thoughts, you might imagine that the mind is a quiet place, a soft stream flowing through the dark. But deep inside your skull, beneath layers of bone and tissue, lies a universe far more dynamic and intricate than it appears from the outside. It is a landscape made not of mountains and rivers, but of pathways, pulses, and patterns. It is illuminated by flickers of electrical activity that rise and fall like city lights glowing at night. And it is within this inner universe that the story of connection takes on a new intimate form. To picture the brain softly, imagine an immense city after sunset. The sky is dark, but the buildings below radiate with window lights, warm here, bright there, dim elsewhere. Cars move along winding roads, each carrying tiny packets of meaning from one neighbourhood to another. Streetlights blink, signals change, and paths are constantly adjusted as the city responds to itself. This is remarkably close to how your brain behaves every moment of your life. Each neuron is like a small building, Each connection between neurons is like a glowing road, and each pulse of electricity is like a car carrying a message. The entire city remains awake even when you rest, because consciousness is not housed in any single structure. It is the emergent music of everything working together. One of the most fascinating parts of this inner city is something neuroscientists call the default mode network, though we can describe it more gently. Think of it as a hidden control room, a quiet space that wakes up when you're not focused on anything in particular. When your mind drifts, when you reminisce, when you imagine possibilities, or when you simply breathe and stare at the sky, this network becomes active. It links regions of the brain responsible for memory, emotion, imagination, and the sense of self. It hums softly when your thoughts wander through familiar memories or explore distant dreams, acting like a quiet narrator shaping your inner story. But here is the gentle secret. This control room is not a single place. It is a network of interconnected spaces, a meeting of distant neighborhoods in the brain that synchronize when you rest. To picture it, imagine several rooms in a house where the lights turn on at the same time whenever someone begins to daydream. These rooms might be far apart physically, but they activate together because they share a purpose. The brain works this way all the time, aligning distant regions into temporary alliances, forming patterns that come and go like shifting constellations. This fluid, interconnected pattern is one reason why neuroscientists often say that consciousness is not the product of individual neurons. A single neuron firing is like a lone violin playing in an empty hall. Beautiful, perhaps, but not enough to create a symphony. Consciousness arises from the orchestra, the rhythms, harmonies, and relationships between millions of instruments playing together. It is less a place and more an event, something that happens when connections reach a certain richness, when information flows freely across an entire network. You can feel this in your own experience. Think of what happens when a memory suddenly surfaces during a quiet moment. Perhaps the sound of rain outside triggers a recollection of a rainy day from childhood. The memory doesn't appear from a single spot. It emerges from countless brain regions, auditory centers, visual imagery, emotional associations, narrative structure, all coordinating with each other. It is like several neighborhoods in the city lighting up at once, exchanging signals with surprising speed and clarity until a single experience forms. Now picture how a simple thought can affect the entire brain. Worrying about something can tighten your chest, speed up your heartbeat, and shift your attention. A kind word from a friend can bring warmth to your face and soften your breathing. These changes ripple through the brain's networks like waves through a pond. Emotional centers, memory centers, decision-making centers all respond to one another. They are connected not by rigid commands but by gentle exchanges, like neighbors passing messages across balconies. Even more astonishing is the way the brain rewires itself. Every new experience, every conversation, every night of sleep, all of it shapes the connections within your neural city. Some pathways strengthen, others fade, and new patterns emerge. This plasticity means that your inner universe is constantly changing. You are not the same person you were a year ago, or even a month ago, not because your body has changed dramatically, but because the architecture of your brain has quietly reorganized itself in response to life. The city rebuilds itself while you live inside it. If consciousness is the music of these networks, then the brain's structure is the orchestra, flexible, dynamic, continually tuning itself. And yet, even this incredible complexity is only part of the story. For within the patterns of thought lie shapes far older and more universal than any individual memory. These shapes appear in dreams, myths, art, and stories across every culture, as if the human mind carries a shared library of images and emotions. These are the archetypes spoken of by Carl Jung, symbolic patterns that seem to echo across generations, linking minds that have never met. What makes these archetypes so intriguing is that they hint at a deeper level of connection, one that goes beyond individual wiring. They suggest that certain emotional patterns and symbolic structures live in all of us, not because we share specific experiences, but because our brains are built with similar circuits shaped by evolution. The hero, the wanderer, the parent, the guide. These figures feel familiar even if you encounter them for the first time. They are part of the shared architecture of human consciousness, arising from the universal foundations of the brain itself. And so, as you drift through the inner universe of the mind, you begin to see that even at this level, so intimate, so uniquely personal, the theme of connection persists. Neurons connect to form networks. Networks synchronize to form thought. Thought resonates with ancient human patterns, and these patterns, in turn, influence how you see the world, how you dream, how you understand yourself. In the next stretch of our journey, we will explore these shared patterns more deeply. We will step from the quiet control room of the default network into the collective imaginations carried by human minds across history, and then drift toward the question of whether consciousness might extend even further than the boundaries of the skull. For now, you can simply let the understanding settle. Even within you, connection is the rule, not the exception. Your mind is not a single point of awareness. It is a constellation. When you look inward, into the soft shadows of memory and imagination, it may seem as though everything you find there belongs solely to you. Your dreams, your fears, the quiet stories you tell yourself at night, they all feel uniquely personal. But if you trace these inner patterns long enough, something unexpected begins to appear, like a faint symbol emerging beneath layers of paint. You begin to notice similarities, echoes of images and emotions that countless others have carried across cultures, continents, and centuries. This is where the idea of shared patterns begins to take shape, suggesting that the mind is not a sealed box but a doorway into something more collective. Carl Jung once described these universal depths as archetypes, though we can think of them more gently as recurring shapes of experience, emotional blueprints that guide how humans across all times tend to dream, fear, hope, and imagine. You do not need to know the term to feel them. They appear in fairy tales you heard as a child, in movies that stirred you as an adult, in the stories your grandparents told, or even in the quiet roles you find yourself playing in your own life. Picture the idea of a guide, a wise figure who appears in stories to show the hero the path forward. They exist in myths from every corner of the globe, from ancient Greece to East Asia, from African tales to Nordic legends. Or think of the shadow, the darker part of the self that characters must face in transformative moments. These themes feel familiar even if you've never studied them. They resonate because they tap into shared emotional structures, patterns that have been woven into the human mind long before any of us were born. You can sense these archetypes in your own life. When you feel protective of someone, the caretaker takes shape within you. When you feel lost and uncertain, the wanderer might stir. When you overcome something painful, the resilient hero appears quietly in the background. These roles are not fantasies. They are ways the mind organizes experience. And the reason they feel universal is because they are rooted in the shared architecture of the brain, ancient circuits shaped by evolution to recognize certain emotional landscapes. This shared architecture becomes even more evident when people gather together in silence, such as during group meditation or simply sitting quietly in the presence of others. If you've ever been in a room full of people breathing slowly, You may have noticed something subtle. The rise and fall of breath begins to synchronize. Shoulders settle at the same moment. Heart rates slow together. The silence deepens in a way that feels collective rather than individual. Researchers have studied this phenomenon and discovered that when people meditate or even relax together, their brain rhythms begin to align. Not perfectly, but noticeably, like the gentle synchronizing of fireflies flashing in the same grove. We can describe this softly by imagining the mind as a lantern. When many lanterns gather in a dark field, their glow begins to blend, creating a single field of warm light rather than isolated points. Something similar happens with minds. Even though each brain is its own city of thoughts and memories, emotions can ripple between people. Laughter spreads easily, fear echoes in a crowd, calmness radiates through a quiet room. These are not mystical effects. They are part of the mind's natural tendency to mirror and resonate. In everyday life, this resonance can be felt in simpler ways too. Think of how being near someone who is anxious can lift your own heartbeat slightly, even if they say nothing. Or how a child's giggle can brighten the mood of an entire room. Or how standing in a crowd at a concert, even among strangers, can make the music feel more powerful than when you listen alone. These experiences show that the mind does not end at the skull. It extends outward through expression, gesture, breath, and presence. Some psychologists call this emotional contagion, but you can think of it more gently as shared atmosphere. When people gather, they create a kind of emotional weather system, sometimes clear, sometimes turbulent, sometimes comforting. And this emotional atmosphere can spread from person to person like a subtle breeze. It doesn't matter whether the people know each other or speak the same language. The body reads the signals and the mind responds. This shared atmosphere, combined with universal archetypes, hints that human minds are not entirely isolated. They are more like waves on the same ocean, distinct in shape but connected beneath the surface. The boundaries of the individual self begin to soften when you see how much of your inner life is shaped by patterns older and larger than you, and how easily your emotions blend with those of others. Even creativity reflects this collective dimension. Writers, painters, musicians, and storytellers often discover similar themes across cultures without having met or read each other's work. Certain melodies recur across continents. Myths about creation, transformation, and loss echo through distant civilizations. These shared patterns emerge not because cultures copied one another, but because human minds, built from similar structures navigating similar emotions, naturally gravitate towards similar symbolic landscapes. This raises a gentle question, one that sits at the edge of psychology, philosophy, and personal experience. Does the mind truly end at the border of the skull, or does it extend, in ways we do not fully understand, through relationships, shared narratives, archetypes, and the quiet synchronization of breath and heartbeat? It is not necessary to choose an answer. It is enough to sense that consciousness, like nature and like the quantum world, has its own forms of connection that defy simple boundaries. As we drift deeper into this idea, a new possibility emerges, that consciousness itself may depend on the degree of connection within a system. This leads us naturally into the next part of our journey, where we explore how the richness of experience arises not from isolated parts, but from the integration of information flowing through a unified whole. If you think of the mind as a constellation, a vast network of glowing points connected by invisible lines, then consciousness is the soft, shimmering pattern that appears when those points illuminate together. It is not any single star, but the way the stars form shapes in the night sky. And in much the same way, Consciousness is not any single neuron, any single thought, or any single experience. It is the harmony that emerges when billions of tiny events in your brain begin to weave themselves into a coherent whole. To ease into this idea, imagine lighting a candle in a dark room. The flame is not a solid object. It has no fixed shape. It flickers and shifts, constantly forming itself anew, yet it feels undeniably present. You can see it. You can feel its warmth. You can sense its dance. Consciousness, in a gentle sense, is similar. Something that appears when the conditions are just right. Something that emerges from the combination of fuel, oxygen, and spark. In the brain, those ingredients are not chemical but relational. They are the connections between neurons, the flow of signals, the synchrony of networks that link perception, memory, emotion, and awareness into a single integrated experience. Some scientists describe this through the lens of integrated information, a phrase that sounds more technical than it needs to be. We can soften it by thinking of consciousness as the feeling a system has when its parts are woven together tightly enough that the whole becomes more meaningful than the sum of its pieces. Imagine 100 musicians playing different melodies at once. It would sound like chaos. But when they listen to one another and align their rhythms, something new emerges. Music. The orchestra becomes an entity in its own right, something you can hear, feel, and recognize. The same is true of the mind. When isolated parts communicate poorly, experience fragments. But when communication flows easily, experience becomes rich, continuous, and unmistakably alive. This idea becomes clearer when you consider times when consciousness feels dim or distant, such as when you're groggy after waking up or drifting into sleep. The brain does not suddenly lose its ability to function. The neurons remain active. Memories, skills, and bodily processes continue, but the integration between networks becomes looser. The orchestra plays more softly. The melody becomes faint. As sleep deepens, the networks grow quieter still, like musicians lowering their instruments until the music fades almost completely. Upon waking, the connections strengthen again, the tempo rises, and consciousness rekindles like a flame catching air. You can also see the power of integration in states of deep focus or flow. When you're absorbed in something, playing an instrument, writing, running, or simply watching sunlight shift across a wall, your mind feels both spacious and unified. Thoughts move effortlessly, distractions fall away, and the boundary between you and what you're doing softens. This is the brain functioning with a high degree of integration. Networks that normally chatter separately begin to coordinate, creating a smooth and steady state of awareness that feels both peaceful and energized. Even emotion plays a role in this weaving. Think of a moment when someone's presence made you feel instantly at ease. Your heartbeat slowed, your shoulders softened, and your mind felt clearer. Those changes were not separate events. They emerged from network-level shifts in your brain and body, aligning perception, emotion, memory, and physical sensation. The comforting presence might have been a person, a pet, or even a beautiful landscape. What mattered was that the experience helped integrate your inner world into something coherent and safe. In a deeper sense, integrated information suggests that consciousness grows richer as connections deepen. A brain with many isolated regions, each acting independently, cannot produce the kind of unified experience we call awareness. But a brain where signals flow freely, where networks cooperate, where patterns form and resolve in elegant cycles, can sustain a vivid sense of self and world. The richness of experience does not come from complexity alone, but from the way complexity is woven together. You can see this idea reflected in the way memory works as well. Memories are not stored in one place. They're distributed across sensory regions, emotional centers, and areas responsible for meaning and narrative. When you recall a moment, a warm conversation, a childhood memory, a favorite place, your brain must gather fragments from many regions and stitch them into a seamless experience. That stitching is part of what makes memory feel alive. It is integration in action. Even simple sensations, the taste of tea, the texture of a blanket, the feeling of your breath rising and falling, require countless networks to coordinate. Sensory signals must be interpreted, compared to past experiences, filtered through emotional significance, and woven into the present moment. Without integration, the world would appear as disjointed flashes. With integration, it becomes a soft, flowing tapestry. This idea also helps explain why practices like meditation, deep breathing, or mindful observation often bring a sense of clarity and peace. These practices gently quiet the distractions that pull networks apart and allow the mind to settle into a more unified state. The orchestra begins to play in harmony again. Thoughts arise and dissolve with less turbulence. Awareness feels fuller, even if nothing in the external world has changed. And so, consciousness, far from being a magical essence or a mysterious substance, may be a natural result of connection. Not just physical connection between neurons, but the informational pathways that allow the brain to sense itself. When these pathways grow richer, experience becomes deeper. When they fade, experience dims. Consciousness is the glow that appears when the mind is woven into a single, coherent whole, much like the flame that appears when the right elements come together. This understanding brings us to a gentle threshold. If the brain, with its billions of connections, can generate such a vivid sense of reality through integration, then what happens when we look outward, beyond the boundaries of the skull, to the larger patterns in the cosmos? Might the universe itself reflect some of these same principles? Networks, structures, harmonies, but on a grander scale. As we drift into the next part of our journey, we will leave the inner universe of the mind and rise into the vastness of the outer universe, where galaxies form luminous webs and where the structure of the cosmos mirrors the patterns we have just explored within ourselves. When you gaze up at the night sky, it is easy to imagine that stars exist as isolated points, each shining alone in its own pocket of darkness. From Earth, the distances between them are so vast, so silent, that they appear like tiny lanterns scattered across an endless black canvas. But if you could pull back far enough, far beyond the reach of telescopes, beyond galaxies, beyond clusters of galaxies, an entirely different picture would begin to reveal itself. You would see that the universe is not a scattered spray of stars at all. It is a web. A luminous, sprawling web stretching across billions of light years, shaping everything within it. Astronomers call this the cosmic web, though we can imagine it more gently as a network of glowing threads, each one carrying the faint shimmer of distant galaxies. These threads form where matter has gathered over the course of cosmic time, pulled together by gravity and woven into patterns far larger than any single galaxy. Between the threads lie vast regions of near emptiness, not truly empty, but remarkably quiet, like valleys between mountain ridges, and along the threads clusters of galaxies gather like bright knots in a tapestry, marking places where the web is densest. One of the most surprising and beautiful aspects of this enormous structure is that the threads are not made of stars. They are shaped primarily by something invisible, a form of matter that does not glow or reflect light, yet exerts a powerful gravitational pull. Scientists call it dark matter, but rather than imagining it as a mysterious substance, we can think of it as a hidden scaffolding. Picture a delicate structure made of glass fibres. You cannot see the fibres directly, but you see the pattern they create because fine droplets of dew cling to them at dawn. In much the same way, galaxies cling to the filaments of dark matter, revealing the shape of an invisible skeleton. This cosmic architecture is astonishing not only for its scale, but for its familiarity. When scientists first mapped the cosmic web using simulations and observations, they noticed something uncanny. The structure resembles the networks found elsewhere in nature. The filaments look like the branching structure of rivers as they wander across continents. They resemble the filaments of fungal networks beneath forests, or the delicate weave of a spider's web. Some even noticed that the clusters of galaxies resemble nodes in a neural network, the kind that fires and flows in the human brain. Of course, the universe is not a giant brain, and galaxies do not think or dream. But these similarities remind us that nature often repeats patterns across scales. The same principles that shape one system, balance, flow, accumulation, branching, often shape another. And so, the cosmic web can be seen as a kind of grand echo, a reflection of the way complexity emerges from simple rules repeated many times across vast distances. To imagine how the cosmic web formed softened the picture of the early universe into something like a warm fog, gently rippling with small variations. These variations, tiny differences in density, were enough to guide matter into patterns over billions of years. Where the fog was slightly denser, gravity gathered more matter, creating the seeds of galaxies. Where it was thinner, matter drifted away, leaving dark, quiet expanses. Over time, these seeds connected with each other, forming long filaments and branching pathways, much like rivers carving their roots toward the sea. The result is a universe that is neither random nor rigid, but something in between, a vast framework that gives structure to cosmic evolution. Galaxies flow along these filaments the way nutrients flow through the roots of a tree. Clusters of galaxies grow where filaments intersect, forming brilliant hubs of light and matter. And within each galaxy, stars are born, planets form, and life, at least in our corner of the cosmos, emerges to gaze back at the tapestry. What makes the cosmic web especially intriguing is not only its appearance, but its implication. It suggests that the universe is not simply a collection of objects scattered through space. Instead, it is a unified structure, organized by invisible threads, shaped by relationships between matter, energy, and the underlying fabric of space itself. Much like the networks we explored in the brain, or the interwoven systems in a forest, the cosmos reveals itself as a system of connections, not isolated islands of existence. Even the vast voids between filaments are part of the story. These quiet regions help define where the threads form, just as silence in music helps define melody. The emptiness is not absence, it is space that allows the web to take shape. In the same way, the mind uses silence to give thoughts clarity, the way forests use clearings to create diversity, and the way oceans use calm surfaces to contrast with their deeper currents. Everywhere in nature, structure emerges from a dance between fullness and emptiness, between motion and stillness. When astronomers map the cosmic web using powerful instruments, the result looks almost like a photograph of neural tissue viewed under a microscope, branching, interconnecting, flickering with points of intensity. Of course, the scales could not be more different. The brain's network spans centimeters. The cosmic web spans billions of light years. Yet the resemblance speaks to something profound. The universe builds complexity through connection, regardless of scale. It is a pattern repeated from the microscopic to the cosmic, hinting at a hidden unity beneath everything. As you sit with this idea, the night sky becomes something richer than scattered stars. It becomes a whisper of connection, a visible hint of thread stretching far beyond what the eye can see. Those threads may not glow in ordinary light, but their influence shapes everything, including the Milky Way itself, which lies along one of these vast filaments like a bead strung on an invisible string. This perspective brings a quiet comfort. It reminds you that the universe is not an empty void with occasional islands of matter. It is a woven, interconnected expanse, full of structure and meaning. And if the cosmos itself forms patterns that resemble the networks within our own minds, then perhaps it is not surprising that we feel so at home contemplating the stars. As we drift further into this cosmic landscape, another whisper begins to call, a hint that reality itself may hold information in ways deeper than our senses can perceive. In the next stretch of our journey, we will explore a theory that suggests the entire universe might be something like a vast three-dimensional image projected from a deeper layer of information, a gentle idea known as the holographic principle. If you take a thin sheet of glass and shine a beam of light through it, you might notice the soft shapes it casts onto the wall. Faint patterns, sometimes sharp, sometimes blurry, depending on the texture of the glass. But if you use a special technique, you can create a much stranger kind of image, something called a hologram. A hologram holds light in such a way that when you look at it from different angles, you see different views of a three-dimensional scene. What makes holograms almost magical is that if you break the sheet into pieces, each fragment still contains the entire image, not in full clarity, but enough that you can still recognize the whole picture. Every part carries the essence of the entire scene. The holographic principle in physics borrows this poetic idea. Not to say that the universe is literally a hologram like one you'd find on a credit card, but to suggest that reality might store information in a way that echoes this strange property. Instead of imagining the universe as a fully three-dimensional stage with its information residing inside, the principle suggests that the true information might be encoded on a two-dimensional boundary, the way a flat sheet can contain the full depth of a hologram. To picture this softly, imagine watching a projection on a foggy window. The image appears three-dimensional, full of depth and texture, but the information that creates it lives on the surface of the glass. You experience a world with height, width, and depth, but somewhere beneath the illusion lies a simpler description. This is the gentle whisper behind the holographic principle. The idea that the richness we see, the galaxies, the stars, the trees, even the emotions that move through us, might emerge from deeper patterns of encoded information. This idea was inspired by research into black holes, those mysterious regions of space-time where gravity becomes so extreme that nothing, not even light, can escape. At first glance, black holes seem like the ultimate containers of information, swallowing anything that falls into them. But physicists notice something odd. The amount of information a black hole can hold appears to depend not on the volume inside it, but on the surface area of its boundary. This is like discovering that everything in your home, furniture, books, memories, conversations, could somehow be described by the paint on your walls rather than by the rooms themselves. It feels counterintuitive, yet the mathematics behind it hinted at a profound truth. Maybe the universe does not store information in the way our senses assume. To make this accessible without formulas, imagine a vast library. Each book has depth, weight, and countless pages of story. But imagine learning that the entire content of every book could be found written in tiny patterns on the covers alone. The books feel three-dimensional, but the information lives on their surfaces. The holographic principle suggests something similar may be true of the universe. that the richness of space is a kind of emergent story arising from patterns written on an underlying surface we cannot directly see. This surface is not a physical sheet or wall. It is more like a boundary condition, a set of constraints that shape how the universe unfolds. You can think of it the way a drumhead shapes the tones of a drum. The surface does not contain the music directly, but it governs the vibrations that create it. In the same way, the universe may be a vast symphony of patterns playing out according to information encoded in a deeper layer. What makes this idea especially intriguing is how naturally it connects back to entanglement, these subtle quantum relationships we explored earlier. If entanglement is the thread connecting particles even across great distances, then the holographic principle suggests that these threads might be the fundamental stitching of the universe itself. In some models, the geometry of space, its curves, its distance, even the flow of time, arises from patterns of entanglement. Where entanglement is strong, space draws together. Where it weakens, space stretches. If you imagine entanglement as the tension in a woven fabric, then space-time becomes the cloth shaped by those tensions. This paints a picture in which every point in the universe carries echoes of every other point, much like fragments of a hologram. It does not mean that every particle is watching every other, but that the underlying information is deeply relational. Everything is connected through patterns so fine and subtle that our senses cannot detect them. Yet everything we see, stars, light, movement, matter, may be expressions of these patterns. You can sense the beauty of this idea when you look at a familiar object, like a leaf. On its surface it is simple, green veins, soft texture, a delicate stem. But the leaf's pattern holds the memory of sunlight, the chemistry of soil, the structure of forests, and the deep history of evolution. In a similar way, the fabric of space might hold within it the history of the universe, encoded not in vast, unreachable volumes, but in elegant patterns at its edges. If the universe truly behaves like a hologram, then the act of observing anything becomes a kind of reading the information encoded in the fabric of reality. The cosmos becomes both the book and the story, both the projection and the source. And the idea that each part contains something of the whole brings a comforting symmetry to the idea of connection. Just as nature holds networks within networks, and the brain holds memories distributed across many regions, the universe may hold its own memory spread across its boundaries. This view does not diminish the richness of the world you experience. On the contrary, it deepens it. It suggests that the reality you move through, the three-dimensional world filled with sound, colour, emotion, and meaning, is a grand unfolding of information shaped by relational structures far beneath your awareness. It is like realizing that the intricate patterns on a tapestry are formed from countless threads pulling together, even though the surface looks smooth. As you let this idea settle, you might feel a sense of quiet wonder, that the universe, despite its immensity, may operate through principles that echo the structures within us. Networks, relationships, shared patterns, and emergent wholes appear everywhere we look, from the smallest quantum ripple to the vast cosmic web. And so, as we drift onward in this journey, a new question forms softly at the horizon. If the universe reflects patterns of information and connection on such a grand scale, could it be that reality itself behaves like a kind of cosmic program, unfolding according to rules that shape everything we see? This is where our exploration leads next, into the gentle and speculative realm of cosmic simulation, approached not as a jarring theory, but as a soft philosophical musing carried on a quiet breeze of possibility. There is a moment, sometimes late at night, when the world grows still enough that your thoughts can wander into places you don't usually let them go. You might find yourself wondering about the nature of reality itself, not in a frantic or anxious way, but in the gentle, drifting curiosity that comes with quiet hours. When everything else softens, the question rises, what exactly is this world made of? Why does it follow rules so reliably? Why does it have such intricate structure? Why does it feel both stable and mysterious at the same time? These questions lead naturally into a realm that philosophers, physicists, and storytellers have approached from different angles, using different languages, yet circling around the same idea. Perhaps the universe behaves like a kind of simulation, not necessarily in the sense of computer code written by some distant being, but more softly, as a world governed by underlying rules, patterns, and informational structures. A world where complexity emerges from simple instructions repeated many times, like snowflakes forming from the symmetry of water molecules. To ease into this idea without any jarring images, imagine a simple game played on a sheet of paper. You draw a grid of squares and you set a rule. A square becomes filled if it has two filled neighbours, or remains empty if its neighbours are empty. Then you start the game and watch what happens. At first, the pattern seems random, but as the rules repeat, shapes begin to appear, clusters, pathways, swirls. These shapes were never drawn by your hand. They arose from the rule itself, unfolding automatically from the structure you created. The universe may be built on a similar foundation. It has rules that govern how matter behaves, how forces flow, how energy moves, and how systems evolve. These rules don't need to be written on paper or encoded in a machine. They could simply be the deepest truths about how existence unfolds. And once those rules are in place, the complexity we see, galaxies, stars, life, mind, can emerge naturally, just as intricate patterns emerge on the grid. This idea becomes softer and more poetic when you consider how much of the universe can be described through the lens of information. At the smallest scales, particles behave less like solid objects and more like packets of possibility. Space itself seems to respond to changes in information, and as we explored in the previous session, the amount of information a black hole can hold depends not on its interior but on its surface. A hint that the universe might store its deepest properties in ways that resemble a coded system. In this sense, simulation doesn't necessarily mean artificial or fabricated. It might simply mean that reality unfolds according to a set of elegant principles that give rise to everything we experience. If the universe behaves like a program, it could be a natural one, a cosmic pattern that generates itself with astonishing consistency. You can imagine it the way you might imagine a music box. Inside, a tiny metal cylinder reflects a pattern of bumps. When the cylinder turns, the bumps pluck the teeth of a comb, creating a melody. The melody feels alive and emotional, but underneath it lies a simple structure. In the same way, the universe's melody, stars forming, planets spinning, consciousness emerging, could arise from underlying rules that shape the rhythm of existence. Another gentle way to picture this is through quilts or tapestries. From afar they show landscapes, symbols or stories, but up close all you see are threads following simple rules. Over, under, under. The threads are not aware of the image they create, they only follow the pattern. Yet from those threads emerges richness. Similarly, the laws of nature might be the threads that weave the world together. Some versions of the simulation idea also point out another curious observation. The universe seems extremely fine-tuned. Tiny changes in the values of certain physical constants, the strength of gravity, the charge of the electron, the expansion rate of the cosmos, would make the universe unable to form stars, let alone life. Instead of seeing this as a sign of design or intention, Many scientists see it as a property of systems that emerge from deeper rules. When simple patterns evolve over time, they naturally settle into states where complex structures can arise. But even as we explore these possibilities, it is important to remember that speculation does not demand conclusion. The goal here is not to decide whether the universe is a simulation, but to soften into the idea that reality may be governed by layers we do not yet see. Layers of structure, information, and connection that shape the flow of time and the appearance of matter. What makes this idea so gentle and so suitable for nighttime reflection is that it places you within a world that is not random or chaotic, but deeply coherent. It suggests that the universe has an underlying logic that holds everything together, like a calm current beneath a restless sea. Whether that logic is encoded in something like laws, rules, or patterns is less important than the simple truth. The world behaves in ways that are stable, enough for meaning to form, and meaning does form. You are proof of that. The fact that you can wonder, reflect, remember, imagine, all of these abilities emerge from the regularities of the universe. Whatever the foundation of reality may be, it is one that allows consciousness to rise like a flame nurtured by fuel. Sometimes people worry that the simulation idea makes the world feel less real, less grounded, but it can also be seen the opposite way. If reality is the unfolding of some deep and elegant pattern, then everything you experience, relationships, emotions, beauty, curiosity, is part of that pattern. It does not make the world unreal, it simply makes it interconnected. All things participate in the same unfolding, the same dance. As you let this idea settle, you might notice a feeling of spaciousness, that reality may be greater and deeper than the surface suggests, that the world is not fragile, that it has a coherence that holds us through our lives, and from this place, our journey gently turns back toward the human scale. Because even if the universe operates according to grand, unifying principles, the way it touches your life happens through small acts, small ripples of kindness, small exchanges of emotion. The next part of our journey brings us back to Earth, to the delicate ways human actions ripple through the interconnected fabric of life. When we look at the universe on the grandest scales, galaxies stretching across invisible threads, space unfolding from hidden patterns, reality whispering through laws older than stars, it's easy to feel small, as if your own life is a brief flicker in an unimaginably vast night. But the same principles that govern the cosmos also echo through the quiet corridors of human experience. The universe, at every level, seems to move through patterns of connection, and when you bring that idea back down to the scale of a single life, something unexpectedly gentle comes into view. Every action, no matter how small, sends ripples through the fabric of existence. To feel this more intimately, imagine standing at the edge of a still pond. You kneel down and touch the surface with just the tip of your finger. The water trembles, circles spread outward, widening and softening with distance. They reach reeds at the pond's edge, stones resting beneath the surface, even the reflections of clouds drifting above. A single touch, gentle, simple, reshapes the entire surface in ways you cannot fully predict. Human actions behave in much the same way. A kind word offered to someone who is struggling may ripple outward into their next conversation, and then into the mood of someone they speak to, and so on. A moment of patience at the right time can shift an entire day's tone for a stranger. Even a quiet smile exchanged with someone you'll never meet again can plant a seed of warmth that travels further than you'll ever know. It can sometimes feel like these small gestures vanish quickly, but they don't. They move through emotional networks like waves across a lake, subtle but persistent. Just as ecosystems respond to the smallest shifts, a few degrees of warmth, a change in the length of daylight, the human world responds to small, tender acts. Emotions spread, behaviors influence each other, and moods echo through families, friendships, workplaces, and communities. You have likely felt this yourself, the way one person's calm presence can steady an entire room, or how one person's frustration can unsettle it. Scientists who study social behavior sometimes describe this using terms like behavioral contagion, but you don't need that phrase to understand the concept. You can think of it more softly. Human feelings flow between people like a quiet breeze. You can sense it when someone walks into a space, a heaviness, a lightness, a spark of joy, a cloud of sadness. You can sense it when laughter spreads through a group, or when silence deepens after someone speaks from the heart. These ripples move through us not because we choose them, but because we are wired to respond to one another. This resonance happens in subtle ways too. When someone speaks with kindness, the muscles in your face may relax without you noticing. When someone shares their enthusiasm, your heartbeat may lift slightly. When someone is anxious, your breathing might grow shallow in response. These are not flaws, they are signs of connection, reminders that humans evolved not as solitary beings, but as members of intertwined communities, shaped by cooperation and shared emotion. Even choices that seem private can ripple outward. The decision to rest when you're overwhelmed may allow you to return to your relationships with more clarity. The decision to pursue something meaningful can inspire others to reconsider their own paths. The decision to show vulnerability can give someone else the courage to open up. None of these effects are dramatic, but they are real, and they can echo far beyond the moment you experience them. There is another kind of ripple too, one that moves across generations. The stories you tell, the values you carry, the ways you treat others become part of the quiet inheritance you pass forward. A gentle habit you develop today may be mirrored by someone decades from now. A kindness offered to a child may shape the way that child treats others when they grow up. Even the tone you bring to daily life, whether rushed or patient, closed or open, influences the emotional ecosystem around you. This interconnectedness extends beyond the human world as well. When you recycle something, conserve energy, or reduce waste, your action joins countless others, contributing to planetary patterns that are much larger than any single choice. Climate, ecosystems, and biodiversity shift with the accumulation of tiny actions made by billions of individuals. The effects may be slow and subtle, but like small raindrops feeding a river, they add up to something powerful. The ripple effect also works inward. The kindness you show others often strengthens your own sense of meaning. The patience you extend to someone else may soften the tension within your own mind. The compassion you practice toward others often becomes compassion you can finally extend to yourself. In this way, your choices not only touch the world, but also return to you, much like ripples eventually returning to the shore. Seeing life in this way, through ripples and echoes, transforms how you understand your own significance. Instead of feeling small within a vast universe, you begin to see that you are a thread within its tapestry, capable of sending gentle waves across the fabric of existence. You begin to sense that your presence matters, not because of grand gestures, but because of the soft influence you have on the world around you. And when you hold this idea alongside everything we've explored so far, the quantum threads, the ecological webs, the neural constellations, the cosmic patterns, it becomes clear that connection is not something that occasionally happens. It is the way the universe operates, from the smallest vibrations to the largest structures. As this understanding settles in your mind, the next chapter of our journey turns inward again, toward what it means to live with this awareness, to feel connected not only in theory but in practice, to move through life with a softness that reflects the interconnected nature of all things. In the next session, we will explore what it feels like to live as a connected being, carrying this gentle understanding through your everyday experiences. There is a moment, usually in the quiet hours of early morning or late evening, when the world feels softer around the edges. Streetlights flicker gently, the air settles, thoughts drift instead of march. In these delicate spaces, it becomes easier to sense that life is not something you move through alone, but something that moves with you, responding, echoing, and unfolding in ways that are deeply interconnected. To live as a connected being is to feel this truth not only in grand philosophical reflections, but in the small, steady rhythms of daily life. Imagine sitting by a window with a cup of something warm. Outside, leaves sway in a faint breeze, their movements shaped by currents of air you cannot see. Each leaf moves independently, yet all are guided by the same invisible breath. In many ways, living as a connected being feels like noticing that breath, the unseen influences that shape your thoughts, your emotions, and your interactions with the world. It doesn't require effort so much as awareness, a quiet willingness to feel your place in the larger flow. One gentle way to sense this is through your own breathing. When you inhale, you're drawing in air that has drifted through forests, across oceans, through the lungs of animals and the leaves of trees. When you exhale, you return that air to the world, becoming part of a cycle billions of years old. This simple act, something you do without thinking, is a constant reminder that your life is braided into the life of the planet. Every breath is a thread in a living tapestry too vast to see in full. Your heartbeat too carries traces of connection. It quickens in response to stress, slows in response to calm, and shifts subtly when you are near someone you trust. If you've ever held a sleeping child or a resting pet, you might remember how your heartbeat syncs with theirs, how both rhythms settle into a shared softness. Even when you are alone, the pattern continues. Your heart responds to memories, hopes, and quiet realizations, each shaped by the countless relationships you've held throughout your life. Living as a connected being also means recognizing that your internal landscape, your moods, your energy, your thoughts, is influenced by more than what happens inside your mind. Light affects your sense of time. Sound shape your emotional clarity. The presence of other people influences how open or guarded you feel. Think of how differently you carry yourself at a peaceful cafe, a quiet beach, a bustling marketplace, or a silent forest. The world speaks to you constantly, and your body listens. This awareness can gently shift how you move through your days. Instead of seeing yourself as a solitary point navigating a chaotic world, you begin to feel more like a participant in a shared field. A field shaped by interactions, memories, spaces, choices, and countless subtle exchanges. When you bring kindness into this field, it expands. When you bring patience, it steadies. When you bring awareness, it deepens. Mindfulness becomes less of a practice and more of a natural consequence of connection. When you pay attention to your breath, you're listening not just to your body but to the movements of the world flowing through you. When you notice a thought rising and dissolving, you're witnessing the mind's participation in a larger pattern. When you sit quietly and simply allow the moment to be what it is, you become more attuned to the world's quiet rhythms. Even the way you think about yourself changes. You start to see that your identity, which can sometimes feel so fixed and separate, is actually fluid and relational. You're shaped by the books you've read, the conversations you've had, the people who've touched your life, the places you've lived. the traditions you carry, the struggles you've endured, and the love you've given and received. You become less like a fortress and more like a river, changing as you flow, taking on new forms while remaining unmistakably yourself. This shift also softens loneliness. When you understand connection not as something you must earn, but as something woven into the very nature of existence, solitude feels less heavy. You begin to sense that even when you are physically alone, you're surrounded by echoes of others, their influence, their stories, their wisdom. You're shaped by relationships that stretch across time, by communities you may never meet, and by ancestors whose names you'll never know. You carry lineage in your heartbeat and culture in your words. You're a single note in a much larger song. This awareness doesn't erase difficulties, but it changes how you meet them. When challenges arise, you remember that you do not have to face them without support. The world is full of systems, people, and quiet forces that can steady you. Even nature itself provides companionship. The grounding presence of trees, the steadiness of mountains, the rhythmic hush of waves. These are not metaphors. Your nervous system responds to them directly, calming as it reconnects with patterns far older than humanity. Connection also shapes how you respond to others. When someone behaves with anger or fear, you might remember that their actions ripple outward from their own internal storms shaped by pain, history, or unmet needs. Compassion becomes easier, not because you excuse harm, but because you understand how deeply people are influenced by forces beyond their control. You see the shared vulnerability beneath every human experience. And through this, a deeper truth emerges. Connection is not something you add to life. It is something you remember, something that has always been there. Living as a connected being is simply living in harmony with what is already true. When you carry this awareness, even the smallest moments shift. A conversation becomes an exchange of worlds. A meal becomes participation in ecosystems of light, soil, and rain. A walk becomes communion with air, sound, and sunlight. Rest becomes alignment with ancient biological rhythms. Your life becomes less a series of isolated events and more a continuous thread in a vast, shimmering tapestry. And with that soft awareness, our journey begins to bend toward its final understanding that connection is not merely something the universe contains, it is something the universe is, and that means you too are not separate from the grand story. You are a reflection of it, a small and luminous piece through which the cosmos quietly looks back at itself. There is a gentle moment at the end of a long journey when the path behind you begins to make sense in a new way. You look back, not with urgency, but with a soft and quiet understanding, as if each step, each turn, each pause has been leading you toward a deeper realization. And now, at the end of this exploration, a simple truth begins to rise like dawn light spreading across the horizon. Everything connects, not metaphorically, not poetically, but fundamentally. Connection is not a feature of the universe, it is its nature. To feel this truth, let yourself drift through everything we've travelled so far as if retracing the threads of a vast tapestry. We began with the smallest scales where particles flicker in and out of possibility. There, connection appeared as quantum entanglement, a soft, delicate relationship between particles that remain intertwined across unimaginable distances. Then we moved into the natural world, where forests communicate beneath the soil, rivers braid themselves across continents, and ecosystems breathe in quiet synchrony. There, connection appeared as life woven into life, each organism dancing with countless others in an ancient and ongoing rhythm. From nature, we journeyed inward, into the brain, a universe of cells and signals glowing like a city at night. There, connection appeared in networks of thought, patterns of memory, shared stories, and the resonance between minds. Consciousness itself seemed to emerge from connection, from the way billions of tiny events knit themselves into a single, coherent experience. Then we rose again, this time into the cosmos, a luminous web of galaxies stretched across invisible scaffolding. There, connection appeared in the architecture of the universe itself, with filaments of matter spanning billions of light years, echoing the networks inside our own minds. Even the deepest theories of space-time suggested that reality might be stitched together by hidden threads of information, relationships so fundamental that space and time themselves may arise from them. And finally we return to human life, to the gentle ripples your actions send across the world, and to the quiet interconnectedness that shapes your breath, your emotions, your relationships, and your sense of meaning. Every gesture, every word, every moment of kindness or hurt, every act of awareness or forgetfulness becomes part of the larger field of experience in which we all live. Seen from this vantage point, the boundaries you once took for granted begin to soften. You're not separate from the world around you. You're shaped by sunlight, gravity, water, memory, language, history, relationships, and the quiet inheritance of human experience. The atoms in your body were forged in ancient stars. The breath you draw was shaped by forests. The electrical patterns in your brain mirror the cosmic web above you. The stories you tell echo archetypes older than civilization. The feelings in your chest ripple outward through the people around you, and through them into communities, and through those communities into the world. You're not a solitary observer standing outside the universe. You are an expression of it. To live with this understanding is not to lose yourself, but to find yourself woven into something larger, something that gives depth to your joys, meaning to your relationships, and a quiet resilience to your challenges. It means recognizing that when you feel awe beneath the starry sky, the awe is not coming from something outside you. It is your deepest nature responding to itself. The universe is not merely something you look at. It is something you participate in, moment by moment, breath by breath. There is a profound comfort in this. It means you are supported by forces older than life, shaped by patterns that have unfolded for billions of years. It means you carry within you the wisdom of evolution, the creativity of stars, the adaptability of ecosystems, and the reflective capacity of consciousness. It means that your struggles, though personal and real, unfold within a much larger frame that holds you gently, a frame where nothing is wasted, where every experience contributes to the ongoing story of connection. And when you feel small, this understanding can soften that feeling too. Smallness does not mean insignificance. In a tapestry, every thread matters. In a symphony, every note has a place. In a forest, each leaf contributes to the breath of the whole. And in the universe, every mind adds a unique reflection, a unique way of perceiving and shaping meaning. You're one such reflection, a small but luminous window through which the universe becomes aware of itself. If you've ever felt a sudden sense of clarity, as though the world momentarily reveals its deeper order, that is the feeling of alignment with this truth. If you've ever felt a quiet connection with someone far away, that is the echo of the relational nature of reality. If you've ever sensed that your thoughts are part of a larger pattern, or that nature speaks a language just beyond your comprehension, that is this truth brushing against the edges of your awareness. You are the universe, thinking, feeling, and wondering. You're a brief moment in the vastness of time, but a moment filled with awareness, one that no other part of the cosmos can replicate in exactly the same way. And so, as this journey draws to a gentle close, you might imagine yourself lying beneath a vast night sky. The stars stretch outward in every direction, glowing softly. Above you, galaxies drift along invisible threads. Beneath you, the earth hums with quiet life. Inside you, thoughts shimmer like constellations, and in that moment, the line between you and everything else dissolves into a soft, luminous truth. Everything connects, and so do you. You're part of the web, part of the song, part of the breath of existence. You're a thread in the tapestry, a spark in the dark, a reflection in the stillness. And somewhere, in that quiet recognition, the universe looks back through your eyes and knows itself a little more clearly.